And something that I find that tends to help is to have conversations with your direct manager team. If you have one, if you're solo dev rel, keep it with your manager or on skip level maybe, because you need to have a firm understanding of what they want from DevRel. And it's not a conversation about more is better in terms of what is frequently called vanity metrics, like more conferences is what we want. You need to know the why, because that will allow you to have an arguing position about what's actually a good choice or a bad choice.
Welcome, fellow avocados, to Developer Advocast, a podcast where we learn how the proverbial guacamole is made directly from some of the most prolific dev advocates around. My name is Jeremy Hess, head of DevRel at Aquilus.io.
And since you've already heard me, I'm Sharon Zisman, the bane of Jeremy's existence and his jokes. I like to call myself the chief manual reader at rtfmplays.dev. And we plan to bring you every 2 to 3 weeks, new episodes, and we'll be interviewing some awesome folks. We'll be joking around because that's what me and Jeremy do. And, bringing, really great topics that we want to talk about in the DevRel sphere.
We hope that you subscribe on Apple or Spotify, and please give us a 5-star rating. Here we go.
Here goes nothing.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Developer Advocast. Today, we're going to be talking about work-life balance in DevRel, and we have 2 amazing guests. But before we get to introducing them, Sharon, let's talk a little bit about one of our favorite communities of days past, OpenStack. I know you have a love relationship with them, so why don't you talk to us, remind us of those good old days.
So when I think about the 2 communities that I call home, so obviously DevOps Days, and all of us are organizers of DevOps Days, everyone on this panel, it's exciting. But yeah, it was DevOps Days in OpenStack. They gave you just like a bear hug, and I always felt like it was coming home whenever I would go to those to the conferences and meet up with friends on the community front. And I recently read a blog post about like everyone always claimed OpenStack was dead. And I feel like JJ was also part of the OpenStack community through Chef and stuff. Is that We're going to introduce JJ more formally in a bit, but do you remember those days?
Oh, absolutely. I credit a lot of my career to that community, actually.
Yeah. They were they did everything. In my opinion, I think they did everything right on the community front. So that's
arms wide open, always accepting, listening, really listening to everyone's ideas, taking them and running with them. I really thought that was one of the most amazing things about it.
One of my favorite things about the OpenStack community that I will always remember is that if you submitted one pull request, one line of code to that project, you got a free ticket to that event. And I just thought that was so inclusive. And everything I learned about inclusivity, I learned from the OpenStack folks. So just big shout out to those people. They're awesome. They're still awesome. And they're also from Texas.
I do need to point out, though, that one line of code usually took about 4 hours worth of work because you got to learn how to use Garrett.
Oh, no.
So that's kind of a deep cut for some people listening to this, but it's true. It's true.
All right, so like with every episode, we're going to give some community shout outs aside from the OpenStack community, which we love, and we really
shout out Dotan for reminding us about it.
Yes, definitely a great blog post that he brought to our attention. But yeah, so Statcraft CFP is open, our local monitoring conf. It's going to be in Hebrew this year, and so I know that this is a more global podcast, but for those listening out of Tel Aviv, the CFP is open, and our former keynote, Quinn is with us today, so we're going to be talking to her too.
Hi.
Yeah. We're going to introduce her more formally.
There she is.
Yeah, right.
And also Liran Tal today put out a really great blog post that I thought was pretty spectacular about some of the amazing open source innovation coming out of the Ukraine, giving a hat tip to some of the folks that are going through a very, very hard time and have done really great tech work. So just really hoping everything in the Ukraine ends soon and that we see peace in our time very soon.
Yeah, definitely. And one more, there was an event.
Yes, one more. Yes, there's a very good event for engineering leaders, engineering managers, led by Linear B and their Dev Interrupted, very excellent Dev Interrupted community. I just thought I would give it a shout out on April 7th. An incredible lineup of some of the smartest women in tech, engineering managers. Like, I was really impressed by the lineup. I have not seen often such a ratio of, of women on, a lineup, like about 70% women and all engineering managers, leading women in the industry. So that made me feel good as a woman in tech. And I just want to give them a shout out for that good work. That's it. So without further ado, let's get into our episode. I want to formally introduce our guests, but I do just want to give a little bit of a preamble here because it's a little bit important to me, because I don't want this episode to come off as like kind of a heavy episode. We had spoken about kind of work-life balance and burnout in the context of things. It's kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to DevRel. We've seen it happen before. Many people that have worked in the DevRel space have found themselves burning out and working a little too hard. And that's also a byproduct of kind of the way how the role itself is even structured. We had the previous episodes that really were a testament to how multidisciplinary the DevRel role is and everything that comes with it, from the diversity of the interfacing within the organization, the diverse product and engineering tasks, even the outbound tasks. And that oftentimes comes with a lot of travel. And if you don't catch it soon enough, and if you, you work yourself too hard and you travel too often and you do a lot of things all at once, you can find yourself getting to a place where you are reaching, the brinks of burnout. And we want to bring folks that we think can provide some really valuable insight. So this is the moment that I really would like to introduce JJ Asghar, today at IBM, but really one of the more seasoned developer advocates in the industry. I don't even know if that's your formal title. I'll allow you to introduce yourself, JJ.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and that is my title, is developer advocate, which we all know means literally nothing now. But it's basically I try to be a personable nerd to anyone talking to IBM. I always say this, and I'll say it here. I literally have the email address of awesome@ibm.com, where you can get directly to me, which is really helpful. And one of the things I've learned in the DevRel community is you need a personal brand. And me just being pompous enough to have that email address makes me memorable.
The CAO of IBM.
Exactly.
Pompous is never a word I would associate with JJ. I'll have you all know. And another seasoned, developer advocate in the field, and somebody who I've always thought has so much empathy and kindness, Quintessence Anx. Tell us what you're doing today, formerly Logs.io and PagerDuty and App Dynamics and a million other things. And she's just a dev advocate extraordinaire. And Quinn, welcome.
Yeah. Hi. So yeah, you hit the three companies right off the bat, at least for advocacy work. Right now I'm at a company called Vivanti. I switched back into engineering work for a little bit here, but because we're a startup and I'm employee number 9, that also means that I carry over a lot of the people facing aspect of the role. And I also like to think developer advocacy in my preferred form is what I like to nickname paid altruism, right? Because you have a parent company, but you're still hopefully really working for the community around that company or in its ecosystem, right? And so I get to maintain a lot of that as part of the current job I have. So that makes me happy.
Oh, that's awesome. And happiness is very, very important. And we'll get to that in this episode.
Yes.
The truth is I invited both JJ and Quinn because JJ, the last time I met up with him, this was at the 10-year reunion at DevOps Days Ghent, the organizer summit. And I was intrigued that after all of that he's done in the industry, he actually chose to go to IBM. And I wanted to hear from him why he made that choice. And he had actually spoken about the fact that he was optimizing for work-life balance. And I found that really, really interesting. So I'd love for you to just unpack that for us, JJ, and how you made that kind of choice and what led you to there.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I was at IBM, I was at Chef Software. So I learned a lot about DevRel and how to interface with communities with the avenue of Chef teaching me, learning from Nathan Harvey, learning from Adam Jacob.
Yeah, we had them out in DevOps Days Tel Aviv also. Oh, it was amazing. That was an amazing one.
My favorite people ever.
And they really are those humans, right? Like they wear their, I think the term is, our heart on the sleeves.
They're
that's absolute. Yeah. And I learned a lot about how to interface with communities through them. And when I hit a ceiling at Chef, and basically they're like, JJ, you're not going to find you're not going to be the next step. You should probably find something else. And I took that as like, oh no, that they're just messing with me, whatever. And I kind of held in a holding pattern. But the irony is the OpenStack community opened up a door for me at IBM. And I got hired on at IBM. And the reason why I did was simply said, the work-life balance is phenomenal. I have two princesses, and they're both under 15.
I have two princes.
That's me too.
Yep.
Also got the two princesses.
It's and I was able to, and something IBM gave me was the flexibility to play, or to be, I should say not play, because I am a father, and be able to still fulfill the best I can in the communities that I'm a part of.
One of the things that I remember you actually speaking about was a little bit about like how intense the travel was in your previous roles, and like how you almost never saw your home, or was a little over the top. And so that's amazing to hear that you could really make those decisions and really take that back, take back that control. So that's I really appreciate that.
Yeah. That mirrors the challenge that I had when I first started at IBM. That's actually what happened, was because the rule I had at IBM was I got a talk accepted. I'm on a plane tomorrow to go to that place. I got a lot of talks accepted all over the world, and IBM sent me all over the world, but I didn't realize I could say no. Right. And now it's because it's been a little while since we had that conversation. Yeah. I've learned a lot where, well, there's been a pandemic in the way. And I've learned to be able to say no. And I've grown from that point where I was at that, you met me at that breaking point, right? That conversation we had was actually like, I was seriously about to throw up my hands and like, fuck it, I'm out. This is breaking me. And I got to the point where I still remember one of the worst times I had was DevOps Days Stockholm. I flew in, it took me about 9 hours to 10 hours to fly there. I was there for less than 24 hours. Wow. And then I hopped on a plane and came back home. When you spend more time on long haul flights than in the actual place you are, that's not healthy.
Yeah, when I used to do that, I would get sick. I would come home and I'd have strep throat for a week, and then what did I do with that? And then I was like bedridden for a week, and I barely didn't see my children. So I totally feel that. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. That's
well, yeah, Quinn, you probably have some personal experiences on similar ish veins. What do you please?
Yeah, and saying no there's a lot to unpack there, because the ability to say no usually comes with seniority, right? And not just in terms of practice, but in terms of actual conveyed authority, right? So when you have someone who's more junior and is perceived as junior in their role or new to their role, and I don't just mean new to the company, I mean like new, they're kind of perceived as having less pushback, like, but I asked you to do something, right? And when you have people who kind of hit that wall, you'll get people who are very prone to burnout. So burnout the discussion of what type of care or what type of protective measures you can use to guard yourself is going to be a little bit different for people who have less tenure in the industry or at a particular company, so that they can actually get what they need. And something that I find that tends to help is to have conversations with your direct manager team, if you have one. If you're solo dev rel, keep it with your manager or on skip level maybe, because you need to have a firm understanding of what they want from dev rel. And it's not a conversation about more is better in terms of what is frequently called vanity metrics, like more conferences is what we want. You need to know the why, because that will allow you to have an arguing position about what's actually a good choice or a bad choice. So let's talk about Stockholm for a second, because it was the last example that was dropped. So let's say that I'm in my first year of DevRel at a new company, and they want to send me to DevOps Day Stockholm. I've accepted talk and all the prerequisites are out of the way. And that's all set up. if I know that they're only going to send me for a flight, a talk, leave the venue after I give the talk and fly back, or leave it at the end of the day and fly back, or whatever the logistics are there, if they don't know what they want out of that situation, then I have the ability to say, does this meet does this meet your criteria? Am I reaching the audience you want to reach? Do we have a business presence in Europe? Do we have a business presence here in particular? Are we going to try to attract talent here? Are we going to be sending sales and or marketing and or product people here? Like, what is the whole package for this particular event? And then you can start to assign, travel value, so that some people are of the mind that they can do the back-to-back travel where they fly maybe to someplace in Europe from the United States, and then they just do conference travel across the continent kind of, and then make their way back. And that's one strategy if it fits with what the company is looking to do. But then the other strategy is, like, if we're going to be doing a trip like that, let's say Stockholm ticks a lot of boxes, but doing a single day stay is like really taxing on the individual. You can also use those whys that you've now asked, hopefully, to make a case for a week, and like a legitimate one, not just, I want to spend a week in Stockholm, although that'd be cool, right? But I want to spend a week in this region when I can take trains or planes. I know trains or planes to these other places and visit these clients or visit these people or whatever. And now I've made a case for not switching time zones so aggressively in such a tiny window. And you can make it out there and actually have a plan to proceed, instead of, back and forth. And then the other thing that comes out of this in terms of guarding your burnout specifically, going back to what I said at the beginning, you need to be able to kind of, in a situation like that, especially if you're solo DevRel and you're kind of the bottleneck for every request that's going to come at you, you need to have an understood by others triage for that. So when people come to you with a request and you just say no, it kind of starts to feel bad, and you need to have good relationships in your company as much as outside. So if people just see you as the no person, it's why security, unfortunately, InfoSec gets a bad rap. If people don't understand why you're saying no, then they just feel the rejection without context, without the ability to give you better requests in the future. I'm not saying all of InfoSec is like this, but if you start to follow people who talk about issues in InfoSec, they talk about this a lot, right? They have to say no, or they have to tell you to do something, and it's hard. And so if you're in this situation where you need to protect your time, giving people clearly defined, I understand from my boss and my skip level what they want to accomplish. This is what the rest of the company can send me that will be acceptable. And this will guarantee you, requester, your odds of success of getting output from me, the DevRel at your company. And that can have a really healthy relationship.
That was a ton of like fantastic information.
Right? Said unpack, wow. You did it. You unpacked.
Yeah, that suitcase was unpacked.
Yeah. I mean, it's all a strategy game, right? And you have to know what I don't want to make it a game, but like, it's like any other game, you need to know the rules of the game in order to move your pieces on the board. And it's the same for yeses and nos.
When you understand that really, really well, you can also advocate for yourself in the context of work-life balance a lot better. I really thought those were really great insights, both of you. Thank you so much for that. One of the things I actually did want you to keep going on, I know that you were the last speaker, but I really love your talk on quantified serendipity. Quinn. I've seen it a few times. Yeah, I watched it online before I invited you to Tel Aviv to do it, and I really like the aspects you spoke about there about empowering diversity in tech. And as a person who really has a very good grasp about how you think about empowering people to take more ownership of their kind of destiny, I would love for you to share some tips on how what you would recommend on the mental health and work-life balance side. What are good conscious choices that you should make in the context of, DevRel when you take on a role like that?
I would say, it's all about strategy. And if you're unfamiliar with how to do strategy and Google searches aren't helping you, finding a mentor in the community that can help you. I leave my Twitter DMs open. I'm not the only one who does, but relevantly, I guess, to this conversation, having a conversation with someone who's been doing it for a little while so that you can start to use the interview process bidirectionally. And this is the same advice you give anyone. And I really believe that the biggest safeguard to your mental health, I promise this isn't off topic, right? This biggest safeguard to your mental health is trying to avoid being in a bad situation rather than fixing a bad situation you find yourself in. Knowing what you're stepping into can really help with that. It's going to be imperfect, right? It's for the same reason that interview loop on the hiring side, you're trying to assess a whole lot of skills very briefly. You're going to be doing the same thing on your side of the table. But if you can start to ask certain questions and see how your interviewers in the plural respond to those, you can really try and help yourself be set up for success for the various places you're interviewing at, again, within whatever other constraints you have. But once you're already at a place, getting in a good place where either the company gives you strategy or gives you the power to dictate strategy, which goes back to guarding your nose and yeses. Like if they say more conferences, and if you ask them what conferences do you want or what criteria do you have, and they say I don't have any, they're like, you can say, great, I'm going to take a week or a month or however long it's going to take me. I'm going to give you a strategy, and then we're going to follow this strategy. And that also guards your mental health, because now you've told them how you're going to implement the gray area that they've kind of handed you. And being able to kind of, I think people refer to this a little bit as like managing upward. And that can happen a lot in a role that's amorphously defined, right? It goes back to everybody saying, we want someone with coding skills, and we want someone who will travel, but can travel a lot, but there's a pandemic. So can you also make a lot of visual or written or recorded content and this and that and the other thing? And if they're not really sure what they're trying to get out of all of that, being able to dictate to them what you think they can reasonably expect to get out of that will really help you with your mental health, because then it also gives you something to fall back on for something else that can plague DevRel, which is prove your value. What have you done for us lately? Yes, we saw you go to the conferences, but if they don't tell you why they want you there, and then all of a sudden it feels off somehow, or they don't feel that they're getting what they want out of it, that means that there's been an uncommunicated expectation that you're just going to keep hitting until you get them to like tell you what it is. And it can also give you the ability to validate in terms of your mental health, where if people say, oh, well, we aren't sure what you're doing, you can tell them. And then you tie it into the business model for them and say, I attended these conferences. We got this many warm leads or this many qualified leads on sales because I had talked to people and they went to our sponsorship booth or whatever framing you need to give it there. And then you feel like you're in a stronger position, even if you're at a company that kind of wanted you, but doesn't know what they want to do about it.
I agree. I think that I've been at places where they came in, they're like, okay, figure it out, or like build us a strategy or whatever it is, but they didn't really understand the KPIs. And that's a double-edged sword, because eventually you think, oh, this is great, I don't have any KPIs, so I can do whatever I want. But at the end of the day, you find yourself like working even harder because you don't actually know what you're up against, and you don't know how to prove success. It's like you can't prove a success or a failure at the end of the day, but like when you can't prove success, you're like constantly chasing your tail, and you're trying to
exactly. When you can't prove success, you're going to self-burn out just to prove volume, right? We might not know what we got out of it, but I wrote 15 blog posts this month.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And that is that. Actually, Q, that brings up a great statement around this conversation. The whole thing is that because there's different styles of DevRel. Right. We have our celebrity DevRels that want to like play the celebrity role. We've got our super technical DevRels. We've got our DevRels that just want to create content and don't want to do the traveling and all that. Another thing, as you go through this process, you need to identify what that personality type you are, and be able to ensure you can mold your role into that one. Because trust me, you get put into that wrong bucket with that skill, or that not those skills, you will burn out very quickly, because you will discover that you are living on it's horrible. Like, I'll write a blog post maybe every 6 months, but if you're asking me to write 15 blog posts in a week, I'm looking for the next bottle of scotch.
So one of the things that, a big part of DevRel and in general, like kind of communities is kind of the side of like kind of the open source and volunteer kind of communities. Spoke about OpenStack and things like that. And one of the things that that I've seen, and historically I've heard, in the Python community, that there was a lot of burnout due to, misaligned expectations from maintainers and contributors. And I'm just wondering how you can build a sort of more reasonable expectation and SLA into like volunteer-led communities to help them be more sustainable. You know, we have all seen, you know, how open source is becoming less and less sustainable. All of us are in the context of open source and love open source, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see what's happening there. So, I mean, that was kind of a ramble, but how do we, you know, kind of lead by example and help build like more reasonable expectations in terms of work-life balance and in entire like communities? JD, from your experience, you know,
that's a big question.
Yeah,
That's a big question.
Is it something that we can even influence, or is that, you know, that's, yeah, go for it, Quinn, if you already have them.
I mean, I think that part of it is clearly communicating expectations, and especially if it's not a new open source project and you have some historics you can rely on, it can really help you, because then you can kind of FAQ style address some common patterns or anti-patterns off the top, where you can say requests typically come for information to be added, but doesn't say to be added where, says that I found an error, but doesn't say on what page it is or whatever. And you can start to say, you can start to even have an intake form using whatever free tier tool of choice you have, and kind of make it a required field that you kind of have to tell, oh, we need to know where it is, or what version of your operating system, or what version of our tool, or both you're using. Like maybe require people do a full printout or something like that. And then you can take a look at, like, more information is better off the top, because at least then you're not going to have, like, if you know you have a 2-week response time, let's just pick a nice number. Then knowing that if you get your requesters, your community, to give you as much information on the top as possible, means that you're not going to be going through a really inefficient process with the person you're communicating with, where they'll say, hey, I'm having a problem installing your product. No other information.
Yeah,
Hey,
no
what version of your
context.
operating system are you running? They tell you. Hey, what version of our tool are you using? They tell you. And if you know that you're going to be doing days or weeks in between these, because again, it's not your day job or what have you, then making them required on the form, at the very least, if they miss a few or they don't provide enough, you know what you're hitting them with first. If they, you know, hey, you gave us the major version number, but we need the full version number, whatever. And you can like go through what they've provided and see where the gaps are. And you can really tighten that info gathering aspect, which I think can really help. But I also think clearly communicating general lead times, where you notice how long it takes you, if you're a solo maintainer, or your team, if there are more than one of you, to respond, you can set that expectation. I think sometimes it feels bad when people are like, I don't want to set a 2-week or a 1 month like expectation. But honestly, if you think about it from your community's perspective, I would rather know that I should expect to wait a month than to wait a month and not know that I should, like, are you getting back to me ever at that point? If it's more than like a few days, I'd say just tell them how long it's going to take you to get back to them due to request volume or whatever reason you give. And I think that doing stuff like that can really help, because really people remember how it is to interact with you. And it's kind of starting off, the example I'm choosing right now is starting off in a negative footing, where they're experiencing some problem or some issue that they're trying to contact you about. So making that as efficient as possible for them will really help turn that around. And I think it makes it feel better to be working on the open source on the maintainer side too. You want to talk about sustainable. We know that we don't want to work on things that make us feel bad. Do you really want to go through the issue queue or whatever in your GitHub repo for your project if you know that you're just going to see just whatever you're going to see since you look last, a bunch of angry
Vitriol.
people pinging on their right, like vitriol or whatever, and people responding to their own tickets because you haven't responded yet and they don't know when to expect to hear from you, so they just keep doing pings, so it has a very short last updated window, so it doesn't accidentally get filtered out, people kind of making assumptions on what they think your process might be and why they might be getting missed or whatever. And it's just going to kind of be chaotic there. So introducing as much process as possible that's reasonable can really help. I don't think that there's going to be a one size fits all for solution. It's definitely going to be a contextual, know where your personal points of friction and difficulty are, and try and design process to mitigate it as much as possible, so that you're set up for success and your community is set up for success. Yeah.
Should we open up a Patreon for open source maintainers? Be like, pay them that way they could quit their day job and they could just purely work open source. I mean, that sounds like one heck of an idea.
Yeah, so you can sponsor repos these days through GitHub that I've seen, and that's a really great move on their part, and I'm happy to see that. What's your take, JJ?
Yeah, I'm chewing on it, and
I'm sure you actually, as a person, formerly at Chef, I'm sure you had an influx of like kind of from the open source side and open source, the maintenance of the community. How was that from the Chef side, just from your experience, and how did you kind of manage it? Manage the volume.
Well, so most of the times I get involved in communities, including Chef, was that there was already some level of process that Q was alluding to that already existed. And I kind of helped, like when I usually come into a community in general, I'm considered a town builder, right? So there's like there's the pioneer, the town builder, and the city planner kind of engineers out there, right? And I find myself usually gravitating to the town builder, where there might be, for lack of a better term, a general store and like a post office, but there's still some dirt roads, if you will, right? Where there is a little bit of a process, but you're still gonna like blow a wheel or whatever. I don't know. I'm stretching that metaphor farther than I should.
Nice though. That's good.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, I find myself gravitating to those spaces because it allows me to experiment and help communities kind of build up to that point, to the point of a city, like a real process-oriented space. And the one thing I've learned over and over again, especially in the Chef community, is that there are a lot of people out there that wrap themselves up in the colors of the project, and they wear those colors excessively, to the point where they almost take it personally when things go wrong. And those humans, it's almost a growth thing where you recognize, like I did it too. Like I was the VMware chef guy on the planet. You talked about VMware and Chef at one point for about a year, 2 years and a half. I was the only person on the planet who understood it. And it got me into some really interesting conversations in the VMware ecosystem, but I quickly recognized that I got a lot of shit thrown at me, right? Like and it was not good, but I had to learn that it's okay not to wear those colors. And there's a lot of people out there who have not learned to not wear those colors, if that makes sense. And to cultivate a community, you need to find your champions who are able to, we're able to understand the value and bring these things forward and be able to be successful. Back to Quinn's point, where you have that process to be able to have that quick feedback loop, you identify the people who understand the process that is created, help iterate, build on that process more. And then in turn, it's a dividend effect where all of a sudden that process gets a little bit better and it gets a little bit better. Like I joke when I come to any project at all, the first thing I do is I look for getting